Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the episode today, we have Bruno Pešec. Bruno, welcome.
Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. So, as Thomas said, my name is Bruno Pešec. I'm a Croatian living and working in Norway. And what I've been specializing in for the last couple of years is helping business leaders innovate profitably. And I'll share a bit more about that while we're having the conversation. But I think that's enough for introduction. I don't want to steal too much time on that.
Well, I looked over some of the things that you discuss, and there's some stuff that sort of pops out at me at a looks like an interesting topic. And one of the things is 9 big don'ts, biggest innovation mistakes, and how to avoid them. Would you like to open with what those biggest mistakes are?
Straight into the head. Yeah, I'd love to. And but before that, I just like to share. Because people sometimes scratch their head like, Bruno, why do you focus so much on kind of failure and mistakes and errors and etc.? And the reason for that is there is something called halo effect and survivor bias. So halo effect is basically a bias when we look at the leaders and luminaries, like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, people like that. And we think, because they're successful, if I copy their practices, then I will be successful as well. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work that well. Another side of that coin is so-called survivor bias, which is again looking at those that have succeeded or survived and trying to copy their behaviors. And there was a great study looking at kind of the people that have survived aeroplane crashes. And they were looking at characteristics. Did it matter how physically active they were? Did it matter how quickly they left the airplane? What mattered? And what they found out was that it didn't matter physical attributes at all. But what mattered was people that tried to get their luggage. So everybody who tried to recover their luggage did not manage to actually vacate the airplane and unfortunately perished. So they managed to then improve the survivability. And that's why we hear those messages, in case of emergency, just leave the airplane, don't take your luggage. So the point of all of this is that we can actually gain more by studying failure and then deliberately avoiding the mistakes than necessarily trying to emulate and copying best practices. Because the thing with best practices is they're usually unique to context, to business, to the individual person, because we're all a little bit different. And that is kind of the backdrop why I decided to look into, from my experience in studying, okay, what are the big innovation mistakes? And I could go for hours, but let's be brief here. So number one thing is mistaking thought for an idea. So if innovation is a process about taking an idea into a business or something that can be monetized, then the first big mistake people often make is they think a thought is equal to an idea. What I mean by that is a thought is unfinished, unstructured. You cannot communicate it to someone. But people think, I just thought that we could do A, B, and C for customer D, that they suddenly have a brilliant idea. But until they actually put it down on paper and they're able to write, okay, this is what it does for someone, there's nothing really to invest in. And that's especially problematic when people have employees and people reporting to them. It can be in SME, it can be in a large corporate. So for example, a boss comes up with something he believes is brilliant idea and then goes, Bruno, this is what I've been thinking about. How about you go test it or make it into reality? Very difficult to happen if that actually hasn't been processed into an idea. To give you a more specific example, a thought would be, how about we have chips on bracelets that we can pay with? Now, that sounds almost like an idea, but what you need to do to take it from that thought into idea is we need to specify actually who is it for, what is it about, and how will it make their life a little bit different. And you might be thinking, okay, Bruno, but you said bracelets for paying. Yes, but what? Let's be more specific. So this team went, okay, we're actually talking about bracelets for paying at the beach instead of carrying a wallet. So people are afraid to lose their wallet. They are uncomfortable to leave the wallet in their clothes when they go for a swim, etc. So, okay, now we're talking about a more specific idea. Nothing if it's good or bad, but we have an idea that we can do something with. Again, the reason I start focusing with that big down first is because if you don't cross that threshold, you're really investing into nothing. And that really can burn out people, money, resources, and time. And that's, we don't want that.
That's a great introduction. And it makes me feel a little bit better about getting on a plane for some reason. I like that. I can share that principle. Sort of reminds me of sort of winging it, and what you're teaching is sort of better planning, better maybe use of resources. So I think it does help. Did you want to go into the mistakes?
Yeah, well, so what I'm thinking, and I would like to continue on what you actually said right now. People often, when they hear innovation, creativity, words like that, they think that that is a process that shouldn't or cannot be planned, or shouldn't or cannot be managed in some way. And that is a big source of friction, because these two aren't polar opposites. You know, like the whole thing, left brain, right brain. I sometimes think, especially when people start talking, that creativity and analytical thinking are two opposites. So you need 2 to 3 people to get some project off the ground. But it's nonsense. Like if you look, every person in the world has the capability to be creative. How creative is different from person to person. That's normal. It's like, you know, like physical attributes. They're different from person to person. But everyone can try it, and everyone can be creative. When people tell me, oh, Bruno, I'm not a creative person, I ask them, have you ever made a dish without following a recipe? If you did, yes, you have some creativity in you. Maybe it was a horrible dish, that doesn't matter. But if you were able to go to your fridge, pick up some leftovers and come up with some dish, yes, that's creativity. You were hungry, you used what you have, and you fed yourself. That's it. We don't need to make it into nuclear science. Where I'm going with this is, when we're talking about innovation, which is, as I said, to me, is turning ideas into money at the end of the story, or some impact if you're for change, you know, environmental goals, etc., then absolutely you need to plan part of the process. You need to standardize part of the process. Where it gets, let's say, free form is what do you want to pay attention? What do you want to standardize? What we were just talking about, what's an idea? That's a way to standardize things without limiting yourself. Because when I shared the example, I didn't say anything about what's allowed to be idea, what's allowed to present itself as an idea. And that's very important. And this is where, in my experience, people start tripping, because they think, you know, I either need a big messy process, or I'm not creative, or I need a very clinical approach. You know, it's like A, B, C, D, E, give me a playbook and I'm going to follow it. This isn't a big mistake I like to talk about, but I was just triggered with like the words that you used, and I think it's something worth pointing out for anyone who maybe is listening and is feeling like, hey, I'm not a creative person, or maybe I need a very specific playbook to follow. Unfortunately, it's the middle ground. It's always the middle ground.
Well, I do. What my interpretation was from, I don't know, let's say the topic that you teach, is that most people, when they look to innovate or improve things, don't actually have a process that they follow. So would you say that you teach that process?
Absolutely. You're correct. The process is often implicit or emergent. I winging it. And the thing is, when we specifically talk about innovation, there are processes, but they're closer to kind of thinking in maturity than necessarily linear A, B, and C, and D. When you have an idea, your first reaction should be, I need to check if this idea makes sense. Your first reaction or first instinct shouldn't be, I need to find money for this idea to pump it out and bring it to the world at all costs. So yes, that is to some extent process thinking, but it's not necessarily what people would always assume, like there is a linear process to it. There's a stage gate model, like I need to do A, B, C, D, but at least it gives us some framing. And when we talk about this type of, let's say, maturity levels, what's usually my recommendation is start from what I just call, market audition, validation, exploration, etc. Figure out if your idea makes any sense at all. And very, very cheap practices are, mankind is very inventive and creative. Your idea or something similar to it has probably been made in the past. Figure out, does it exist right now? If it does, figure out who is buying it, why are they buying it, what are they doing with it, etc. Like small things like that people overlook are very easy ways to start with your innovation project, to test it out, to figure out, is it worth your time at all? That's your first check. Not if you can make millions with it, but should Bruno and Thomas spend any more of their precious time on this idea? Ideas are cheap. Time goes only one direction for now. If you know a way to reverse it, please let me know. But if time is the most precious thing you have, then you must realize that ideas are nothing but commodity. And this is where innovators, and heck, people that are not even innovators, they get an idea and they hold it close to their heart and they feel it's something precious. It always stays close to them, but it never gets exposed to the real world. And they hold this false belief that this idea is just theirs and they have only one chance at it. In most cases, that's not true. If it's good, it'll come back. It's very, very rare that idea is so brilliant, unique, and at the same time so easy to copy. Because Thomas, you might have the best idea in the world, but it's in your head and we are not perfect communicators. So even if you say it to me, I won't be able to grasp really everything that you're thinking, and there will be so much more hidden behind that idea because you did much more thinking about it than I did. So there is very little reason to hold ideas so secret, because if you hold them secret, you never expose them to the world, you never get feedback, you never can develop your idea.
It makes me think that people are afraid to get that kind of feedback. That's why they hold it close to their chest. Do you think that's true?
Absolutely, 100%. And it's different types of fear. So in my experience, there is definitely this fear of being mocked, being ridiculed. Oh, this is a silly idea. Why are you working on that? This is not worth your time. That's one fear. And to that, I always say, what your friends say doesn't matter. The only feedback that matters is from your potential customers or benefactors of your idea. So if you're working on teddy bears for adult men, then only feedback from adult men is what you should care about. not your neighbor, not even your wife to some extent. It's kind of, people that this idea for are the people you want feedback from. So that's it. Of course, every innovator is going to be ridiculed at least once in life. So that's normal. Relax. Then the second one is, of course, fear of failure. It's like, is my idea good enough? Will anyone react to it? And to that, I go back to the story I shared earlier. Ideas are commodities. If nobody wants it, that doesn't mean that you failed as a person. It just means that at this moment in time, people don't want it. If you want, you can test it later in life, or you can just put it on your shelf and be at peace because you tested the idea and maybe it didn't get the response you wanted it to, but you can at least know that you tried. And the third one, which is quite fascinating, is actually fear of success. So in my experience, a lot of leaders, and especially founders of startup companies, once they get to the red line, meaning, their first big contract or maybe their first 10,000 or 100,000 customers, the gravity of success starts setting in. They start realizing, okay, now I have responsibility to deliver my product or service or whatever to all these people, and I have responsibility to keep delivering to them, over years and years and years. And not only that, but I will need to hire people, and I will need to grow the company, and I will need to, always think about their livelihood, because their job is very rarely to make company extremely successful. Their job is part of their business. It's just how we are. So that fear To that, I can only say, well, never fear success, but always find a peer group. Peer groups are the best thing. Find people in similar position and speak with them. I wouldn't call it a therapy, but it is a sort of therapy.
So that people are aware. Who is it that typically hires you? What does that conversation look like?
Yeah. So what I like to say is I help business leaders innovate profitably. I make my living from big companies. That's where I make most of my living. I work with managers and executives in companies that have multiple business units, and I help them basically monetize their ideas. For SMEs, small business owners, etc., I create a lot of materials, and I'm always happy to have a chat if they are struggling in their specific industry, in their specific domain, etc. I'm always willing to help out, because to me that's very important. It is the community I came out of. I was very fortunate to work with some very smart people, to get coached and mentored and etc. And I'm always trying to give back to the community. So whomever is trying to bring their idea to reality, happy to at least share something.
Have you got some examples where you've helped one of those big companies innovate something that perhaps was beneficial to them?
Of course. Just anonymizing a little bit, how it is with bigger players. Financial institution was looking into making themselves more innovative, and it was a financial institution that basically provides all types of financial services. So think from loans, retail banking, to advisory on investments, to big corporate funding, etc. And what they were looking into is, okay, how can we actually live and recreate ourselves in this world of fast movers, disruptors, tech companies trying to enter into financial space, all the fintechs, regulation changes. So anyone who is in the space, they will know about PSD2, then looking at GDPR, privacy laws, etc. How do we become more innovative? And the approach that we've used with success is something I like to call innovation vanguard or vertical slice. Instead of trying to change the whole organization at once, because that doesn't really work with big companies, trying to change hearts and minds of 10 or 100,000 people at once, it rarely works unless it's a highly traumatic event. So what we did instead is we took a vertical slice of a company. We said few select executives, few select middle managers, and few select frontline teams. Hey, let's go together and let's figure out, how to be more innovative. What are some of the solutions we could be working on in the future? So it wasn't just bringing ideas to life, but it was bringing to life new way of work and organizing, moving forward together, doing innovation strategy together, measuring these projects, running teams a little bit differently. And I know this is very abstract, but I'll keep it at that level just for confidentiality reasons, for specific products and services and etc.
Banks don't mind when you reveal confidential information, do they?
I'm not willing to find out.
So I got one on bold growth. So, and the quote is, how to craft fearless strategy in a world of disruptors, fast movers, and copycats. Have you got thoughts there?
Absolutely. First, always start from where you are. I know this sounds silly, or maybe it sounds overly simplistic, but so much advice is, try to imagine the future, 20, 30, 50 years, work backwards, etc. The thing is, when we're talking about specifically innovation and growth, the best is to look, okay, who are you serving right now? Who are these people? And then start working out, okay, what are actually their jobs to be done, their desired outcomes, etc. Because the thing is, those things change very, very, very slow. New iPhone might come out new year. New smartphone might come out new year, but need to communicate with each other won't change in next 100 years. How we communicate with each other, that is changing, sometimes faster, sometimes slower. That's why if you want to really create like bold strategy, actually the best approach is to develop really, 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 really deep understanding of your customer base. And then you can be adding things, either serving more of the same needs or expanding and serving the same needs, but for a different group of people. And some may say, oh, how is this bold? How is this disruptive? Bold and disruptive isn't the same. So again, if you're focused on the people you're serving, it's much, much easier to avoid disruption itself. Disruption happens when company starts looking too internally, too introspective. Oh, we have introduced new products because we decided to introduce new products. That is introspection. That is when big companies start failing. Not only that, but now I'm talking specifically about larger companies. Mergers and acquisitions are really popular mechanism, but majority of mergers and acquisitions actually end up in value destruction. So people think that, okay, we're going to acquire a very successful startup or unicorn or someone who has been growing in specific domain, and therefore we bought those customers or market penetration or whatever. It rarely works out. And that's why I always say, you want bold strategy, start with where you are and then figure out how to grow concentrically instead of trying, to figure out something that doesn't exist. The only thing you'll be correct is that you're wrong. Because at least as far as I know, there's no functioning crystal balls. But if you have one, I'd like to buy one.
I think I share your opinion on that one. It sounds like a very, very interesting job or interesting work. How did you get into this space? It sounds like something that you created for yourself through some sort of innovation strategy.
Unfortunately, it was not innovation strategy, but it was the process that was highly emergent and adaptive. I like to say that I'm an accidental consultant. I basically started as engineer, and I was working on some very, very difficult projects, bringing some quite innovative ideas to life. And one of them failed quite miserably, but not on the technical side. So this is what happened. We had a customer that asked for impossible. And me being a young engineer, working in a team of young engineers, we took it very personally. And we did everything we could, to come up with what the customer asked. And we managed after a lot of prototypes, a lot of testing. But the thing was, customer didn't believe us. They themselves did not believe that what they asked for was possible. And we couldn't convince them. And then we had to send our product across on a tour across the world so that customers can actually see for themselves that this is really possible, that this really exists. Now, the trouble, and everybody who's ever worked in a physical business will know this, if you get good enough engineers, they can reverse engineer any physical product. Guess what happened in 2 years? Well, for me, that was a big trigger because I did everything right from the perspective of what I've been taught about product development, innovation management, the whole process. And yet this was pretty big flop commercially. And that triggered me to start thinking, okay, what is then innovation? I mean, we did everything we could have. We used all the modern methods, all the approaches, everything. And that's where I started figuring out, oh, it's the human side as well. It's how we talk about things. It's how we network with each other. It's how we sell things. It's how we organize whole structures. And then it was just like a rabbit's hole from there. And here I am 10 years later.
It's interesting because it sounds like a sales problem more than anything. And also, I'm interested to know about your thoughts about going away from engineering. Because I would imagine it's quite engineers strike me as people who it kind of integrates into their life. Like if someone has a profession, their job or something, they don't necessarily take that into their life. But with engineers, I think that's slightly different. So have you got thoughts there?
Yeah. There's something now that you mention it. There is truth to it. Of course, it's important to share as well that there are different branches of engineering as well. So I guess what contributed to the way I was developing is that I studied specific branch called industrial engineering, which is about systems. So industrial engineering was kind of a response to kind of combining mechanical and production engineering with organizational and management side of businesses. So it had this more systemic and more holistic, let's say, view on it. But what you say, I think that definitely spilled in other areas of my life. So I would say that in some regards, I'm what you would expect from stereotypical engineer, like pedantic, thinking about systems. There is a process A, B, C, D. But what really helped me, at least from industrial engineering perspective, was the whole systems thinking and systems approach. Like the sum is bigger than the whole, than the parts, etc. All those small things.
And what about the sales side of things? Do you think that if your product that you were referring to, if there was a different sales approach, would it have been a different outcome?
Most likely. I think that's so. It's all interconnected. Of course, in my example, the technical team was almost separate from the other processes, and that was also what triggered me later to reflect and think, okay, obviously, if the whole marketing process was different, if the whole sales process was different, if the whole account management process was different, it probably would have turned out differently. At the same time, the customer wasn't so alien to us. So we were able to show him the thing, but we were not able to persuade him that this actually is what he was asking for. So I can tell you, for me as engineer, like stepping out of that engineering cocoon, I had to invest a lot of energy to understand sales and marketing and branding. And I'm no expert in that, but they're all important processes in the big picture of things. And that is kind of when we look at innovation, it's really a confluence of a lot of different approaches and methods and bodies of knowledge. You cannot be successful at innovation without understanding at least a little bit of a sales process, of a marketing process, of a branding process, product development process. It's all intertwined. How we talk about value is as important how we create value. One without the other is out of balance and will probably not be as successful as people are hoping for.
Reminds me of a little lesson that I learned about books and about best-selling books, and how the best-selling book is not necessarily the best written book, whereas it sounds like your product there was probably the better product, but the book which is the best-selling book is the book which has been sold the best. And I was wondering what you thought about that, and also in relation to the fact that you have a new book, and can know what your thoughts are in relation to the point I made.
I completely agree. And talking about product wrapping and explanation and how it's phrased. So I have two bookshelves behind me. Some of them are bestsellers, some of them aren't, but they're still genius. And books are fascinating. So I love reading. I think reading is underappreciated. There's so much to learn from past generations, and I love discovering old books. And what I'm always fascinated is, okay, you can immediately see books that were popular and were written to be popular, like it's specific language, specific product packaging, etc. Then you can see books that are popular, but are not that well written or are very, very dense. So, for example, Thinking Fast and Slow, it's not a bad book. I'm not saying it's poorly written, but it's a dense book that's very popular, but very few people actually read it, even if they might have bought it. So that's another example where we have a book that's actually good and dense, but isn't actually read. And of course, then there's the long tail of bad books, poorly sold, and great books, poorly sold. And I have some of those here, like the Corporate Startup Strategy, the Strategic Logic, brilliant book about just strategic logic, written in accessible manner, but never really sold at all. I try to take my lessons for the book that I've written. So one of the things that I looked and together with my co-author is that today people are so busy. We don't want to write a book that's 400 pages. We want to write a book that people can read. So we put a very strict design criteria on ourselves. We said it has to be 100 pages. Like what we have to say has to be no longer than 100 pages. And let me tell you, for talking about strategy and data and improving decision-making processes, that wasn't the easiest, but we managed to do it. So we managed to actually put it in 100 pages, using what we believe is plain language, speaking directly to people, executives and business leaders that want to use data to make better decisions. In terms of sales, so I did learn something, hopefully, from all my experiences. And what I'm happy to report is that we've been selling it, or it's been selling on Amazon. Yes, Amazon for a month or two, and it already has like 15 5-star reviews. So I'm very happy for that. that I sell to myself, okay, this means that we're at least a little bit close to what we tried to achieve. If it'll be a bestseller, I don't know, but I honestly also don't care. It's like, it's out there, people that need it, I hope they find it. I don't want to see it on New York, stalls. It's not that kind of book.
Have you got any moments, or let's say chapters, that are favorite chapters that you would mention?
Okay, yep. One of my favorite chapters, not sure about Dominic, might be his as well, is when we go specifically into 4 data sources that any company and any business has, but is very rarely leveraged to the full extent. So when we look specifically about the data that we have out there, we never had more data in history of mankind. One company like eBay produces more data in single year than whole of mankind up to that year. And that's just looking at one company like eBay. Now imagine adding Amazon, Alphabet, Facebook, all of this, massive amounts of data. But our decisions aren't getting better. Why? Well, because we are drowning in data. The answer, look at specific data sources to improve decisions. So the 4 data sources. 1, operational data. That's all about, success of your business, number of products sold, economic data like turnover, revenue, income, sales, margins, etc. Easy. Everybody follows that. And when you say that, yeah, we have it. Good. Then the next one is customer experience. Another one that's been gaining a lot of traction in the last 10, 20 years, but is still, unfortunately, not tracked as much as possible. But customer experience, how are people reacting to your products and services? What are they doing? It's everything we discussed in the last half an hour or what. And then 2 more that are equally important, but often overlooked. Ecosystem data. So it's not just your competitors, but what's society around you doing? How is the planet changing? How are regulations changing? All those things. And then the 4th one, most often overlooked, is expert knowledge. I'm not talking about external experts like myself. I'm talking about internal expertise. If your company has 100 people, and let's say I'm one of the employees, if 99 people cannot access me, then your company doesn't have the skills I have. You cannot say that we are innovative company or that we have skills of that. If the company has you, Thomas, and people cannot access you, then the company cannot say that really what you know is what the company knows. And that's so often overlooked, because a knee-jerk reaction, especially for bigger companies, is like, let's get external expertise, let's buy insight, let's buy market intelligence, let's look at some research and let's see what's been happening. Well, most often, including insight from the people on the front line is the most valuable impact. You asked me about bold strategy, and I told you, start from the inside. Start from the inside with people that are closest to the customer. You don't need to go out and hire an external marketing or PR agency to do that work for you. You can start with the people that you have right now. Your employees know the most about your customer. Now, these 4 data sources, they work together in conjunction, because what they're telling you about the things that have happened and that are signals for the things that might happen. And they're telling you something both about yourself as a company, as a business, and the external environment, how it's changing. So when you have these 4, then you can be making informed decisions without feeling overwhelmed with the billions or millions of data and things that you have been measuring and tracking accidentally or purposefully or whatever. So that is kind of, let's say, one of my most favorite chapters, because in my experience, when you show something to someone, when you raise their awareness of something, it becomes impossible for them to not see it again. If you think about those, visual tricks, when they show you a messy picture and then someone says, well, there's actually a giraffe there. And then you always see a giraffe there. That's kind of the thing. And that's what I love doing with people, point their attention and help them notice something they haven't noticed before. Because when they become aware of it, of course, there's discipline to them improving that. But once you're aware of it, you can start improving. If you're not aware of it, then even if you get better, it's going to be accidental. And unfortunately, if you want to build a successful business, it cannot be a string of happy accidents. You can have 1 or 2 happy accidents, but if you want repeatable success, you must be aware of the things that you have solved or improved in order to be able to repeat that success again. But that was a long way around.
No, you're fine. I wanted to pick up on something which I'm interested to get your take on. And you mentioned discipline, and we've been talking about, let's say, a better process to innovate things. And it makes me think, have you thought about or covered, let's say, how committed someone is to actually make the success of a particular idea or innovation? Because there's the approach that you take to, let's say, make it successful. And then maybe behind that, there is someone's actual commitment and their ability to follow through on it. Do you spend any time there at all?
Absolutely. It ties back to at the beginning when you asked me about 9 big don'ts. So one of big don'ts is, I say, never invest in orphan ideas. And what I mean by that is ideas don't get executed out of thin air, just like you were talking about now. It requires commitment. It requires discipline. So when it comes specifically to innovation, again, it's not the most pleasant journey. Like putting yourself out there, testing your idea, getting that feedback, which isn't always pleasant, it's not always a very joyful journey. Although there's nothing, that beats the adrenaline rush of actually creating something. In that process, what's very important is, okay, if the person coming up with the idea is the one executing it, it's easy. But if you're in an organization and let's say, Thomas, you come up with an idea and give it to me, then we already have much bigger risk to fail with this whole idea, because I might take it to a certain extent, but if it becomes too much for me, be it emotionally, be it however else, I might give it up, or I might, bring it back to you, whatever. If you look at the venture capital world, one thing that they learned really, really well is that what matters more for investment is the quality of team than necessarily quality of idea. Because better team is actually going to find another idea to execute and most likely build a startup that will do returns than necessarily a weaker team with a brilliant idea. A brilliant idea that never materializes has no value. A mediocre idea that materializes has value. So that is, I completely agree with what you said. It is very important to have people that are actually committed. Committed to is also another discussion. What do you commit yourself to? I mentioned that earlier, but I'll repeat it. You might have a big idea, but what you have to commit yourself in the beginning is to see if that idea is worth of your time. And then the next commitment is, okay, is it worth of someone else's time? Then the next commitment is, okay, can I get money for it? And then the next commitment is, okay, can I build a company around it? So you stack those commitments as they go, instead of saying, okay, I commit myself to bring this idea to life or die trying. not good. Too extreme.
Great answer. And it does make me think about the difference between, let's say, because when you've been answering, I've been thinking about my own experience, and then obviously you'll to some degree you've got experience with massive companies rather than small businesses. What's the difference in approach for you between working with a big company and working with a small business, say?
So, as I told you, I make most of my living with big companies. Where I volunteer a lot of time is actually working with startups and entrepreneurs and etc. So in Norway, I brought Founder Institute to Norway, which is a startup accelerator. I'm running a big startup community, several thousand members. And what I've repeatedly experienced is one big benefit of every small company or a startup is focus. They have only one product, only one strategy, only one direction. Sometimes that might feel limiting, but that is the biggest advantage. They don't need a strategy for buying toilet paper. They don't need a strategy for engaging with vendors. They only need to figure out one thing. Who is my customer segment and what do I do for them? And do that again, again, and again. Where actually founders start stumbling is they start focusing on everything that doesn't matter. Accounting and bookkeeping is important. You don't want to end up in prison. But if you spend 8 hours a week bookkeeping, that means that you wasted 8 hours that you could have spent understanding how to create value for your customer. And startup owners often do that. They go and they try to learn marketing themselves. They try to learn, designing themselves, how to use, Photoshop, build websites, etc. It's okay. It's a waste of your time. Like spend, $50, buy a template, get over with it. Your customer will not hate you because you have a crappy website. They will hate you if you don't do for them what you promised to do for them. So startup owners' time is always best spent getting the next customer or testing, if they still don't have a product, testing their product with the customer. And that is something I keep repeating to them, like your job number one as a young CEO or a business owner is to bring in the business. That's your job number one. Everything else, you need to find time to delegate as soon as possible. Of course, if you're bootstrapping, yes, you need to do some things yourself. Of course, if you have some skills that you can use them. But if you want to actually create the business, doesn't matter, small, startup, whatever is the ambition, you must learn how to delegate all these tasks that are important for the business, but aren't important for the success of the business. That's my experience.
You also, would you encourage people to also use the board game, Playing Lean?
Well, I would suggest them to find someone and to run the game for them. So the board game you mentioned, we actually did make for that purpose, exactly for people that would like to learn a little bit more of this lean startup approach to developing their businesses, but don't necessarily have time to study a lot of books or to attend a lot of courses. So then they can play a game. It is made to be run by facilitators, and we have over 200 facilitators across the globe. So if anyone in their country is interested, I suggest to hook up with one of the facilitators and ask them when the next game is going to be run. And since you mentioned it, Thomas, anyone listening can check that list on playinglean.com.
Okay. What made you do that, just out of interest? What made you create it?
Well, I guess it's the same thing as a lot of things, curiosity, fun, joy of creating something. So Playing Lean actually came out of own need, scratching our own itch. So my friend Simon was giving a workshop to a group of IT executives, and he was teaching them a specific method from Agile called Kanban, and he was using, let's say, a board game for it. And he wanted to do the same with the Lean Startup method, but there was no games out there for it. So then we said, well, why don't we try make our own? And from then, a lot of prototypes, a lot of failure as well. So first, when we created, after many prototypes, we decided to use crowdfunding. But we failed. We didn't manage to do it. But what we did is we looked at everybody who supported it, and we realized that our actual customers are facilitators, consultants, coaches, not people that would play the game, because you want to play the game once to learn the method, and then you want to go and make money. You don't want to keep playing the game into infinity, but it is teachers, educators that would use the game again and again and again. What we also learned is, okay, if these people are actually the customer segment, what is most important to them? It has to look professional. It has to look good on the bookshelf. It has to be supported by the thought leaders. Now, if you've been listening carefully, not you, Thomas, but the person, the audience, I always said, look at what the customers need and then meet them there. That's what brings success. And that's exactly what we did, because once we realized educators require these things, then we partnered with one of the best illustrators in the world, Holger Nils Paul. We partnered with thought leaders like Alexander Osterwalder, Esh Mauria, etc. All these things that we found that customers need and that customers value and are willing to pay for. Since then, it's been sold out twice. We updated it, and we just keep doing it. And to me, it's a very fun side project that I really enjoy doing. And people have fun and learn something new. You can't beat that.
Yeah. Normally, it's one or the other, either entertainment or education. But you've managed to put it together. So well done. What are your goals?
So, very simple. My goal, at least from what I've been doing for the last number of years, what I said is I had very good fortune of having supportive environment. My parents always let me know, son, study whatever you want. We're going to support you. Do what you want. We're going to support you. And I had good fortune of studying things I loved, then doing the job I loved, and just following my interests. And what I said in that process is, what really helped me is learning from people, learning from the books, learning in the community. And then I said, I want to keep giving back. So that's why I write regularly. If you go to my website, you will see like 3 blog posts a week. I make all the resources, everything I do, I make it available for free. The book that I mentioned is, I don't know, $4 or $5, something like that, the very minimum that can be put, etc. And my goal is actually very humble. I always say, like, one person, if I help one person, I'm happy. I'm not dreaming of, changing a million minds and hearts, just one. And I also hope, just one listener from this episode that tries something different, I met my goal. That's it.
Well, I certainly think, I've been in the position where we've attempted to innovate multiple times, and sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't. And I think now that I'm aware that, honestly, it was just I suppose doing the best you can might be the approach. Now that I know that there is an approach, I think when it does come time to actually innovate again, I might think about looking up some of those blog posts. So I think you've helped me in that way, and I'm sure you will help me again when I attempt to innovate next time. Is there anything that I should have asked you about today? No, I wouldn't say. I think this has been a very natural conversation, and this is a topic I could be talking about for many, many hours, but you asked great things with a very specific focus, and I really think, we could spend more hours, but we don't have to, because what you asked is great. Bruno, where's the best place for people to find you?
www.pesec.no, like Norway.no. I guess it will be in the notes as well. If not, Thomas has my contact. You can always reach out to him, and I'll be happy to help out. Just write, Thomas is sending me.
Well, thank you very much for the value today. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.